It is time for another edition of Orange and Blue. Today, we're presented by Sean Honda, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason. Our training camp previews continue, and this preview is going to be very complicated, Mace, because we're talking wide receivers today. And you have Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, Tim Patrick. I'm going to throw Marvin Mims Jr. as a big four, although he's the rookie and he's got the catching up to do. But really, this is almost madness. Because who's going to be the leading receiver for this team? They have so many good ones. Are all of them going to make it through training camp? A lot to get to, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the big question right there, is because when you start factoring in special teams needs and how that determines the back end of any wide receiver group, you start saying, okay, well, there are some players brought in or around because of their special teams ability. Marquez Callaway, they bring in free agency. Little Jordan Humphrey is somebody who was in Saints camp as well. Kendall Hinton is somebody who is still around and will probably get a chance to make an impression. And then you have deeper developmental guys like, once again, second straight year, Brandon Johnson had a really good off season. And, you know, again, we can't say too much about what we saw in those OTAs, but we can tell you that Brandon Johnson had some nice catches and looked really good. And basically played at a level to where he's almost telling the coaches, I dare you to cut me. And when you've got those factors coming in here, all of a sudden you start looking at maybe a squeeze at the top, and maybe this is an area where there is a surprise move at some point during the preseason.
Yeah, and we'll see about that, because someone like Brandon Johnson, you're not going to keep him down in the preseason. He's going to make plays, and someone's going to want to pluck him if you try to, sneak him through to the practice squad. So at the top, we're going to position and preview training camp, and it's like, okay, we're going to talk a lot about Courtland Sutton. I don't know if he's going to be here week one. I hope he is. I love Court. Mm-hmm. You love Court. But Jerry Jeudy seems to be Sean Payton's favorite. Just kind of, that's my guess. Tim Patrick isn't going to go anywhere. He's a dog. Like, he's going to be in the mix somehow. And I think Courtland Sutton looks more explosive than, quite frankly, Mace, I've ever seen him. Yeah,
I'm not going to say more explosive than I've ever seen him. I will say more explosive than at any point since he tore that ACL in Pittsburgh back in 2020. That this is the closest he's been to that dynamic player. And the other thing, I mean, also that dynamic moment, the weird thing is, Cease, the guy who was making that possible at the quarterback position for the most part was Joe Flacco, the maligned Joe Flacco, but he and Courtland Sutton had a groove going in the first half of that 2019 season. You made the gesture. They were sharing some moments out there. And it's never gotten back to that level because of injuries, because it changes at quarterback. I mean, I think, with Drew Lock and Courtland Sutton, you could argue they never really had enough of a chance because Courtland goes down in week 2 of 2020. That was their 7th game together. At that point, actually, didn't Sutton miss the first game of 2020 before he? I
believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So it would have been their 6th game because he wasn't out there in week 1 against Tennessee.
There's another what if. Boy, we got a lot of what ifs.
Yeah. So I mean, it's taken a long time. I would also say that with Courtland Sutton and Tim Patrick both having ACLs, Court is kind of the cautionary tale as Tim Patrick comes back, but not every recovery is different. Not every player has the same skill set, the same ability to bounce back. And then there's just the type of receiver that they are. Courtland Sutton, the thing that he's missed is that ability to get that little extra separation that hasn't been there, I would argue, until the last few weeks. But then you mentioned it. Sean Payton really seems to like Jerry Jeudy. You can see it with the way he coaches him in practice. I asked Sean Payton about Jeudy during OTAs and the way he responded about him, the working on the details. It's pretty clear that Sean Payton sees something special in Jerry Jeudy, and failing all that, let's just talk about the fact that they picked up the 5th-year option without seeing him practice. And I don't think they do that if they don't have a belief in what Jerry Jeudy's skill set is and what he can become in this offense.
Right.
So I feel safe in saying that Jerry Jeudy's hope Jerry Jeudy's going to be the alpha of this room.
Yeah.
It's a question of whether he can do it. That's what we're going to find out.
I think Sean Payton is like the two Bobs in Office Space, and Jerry Jeudy is Peter Gibbons. I don't think you've been challenging him enough. Yeah. I don't think it's not Bill Lumberg's blaming it. Hey, the Jerry Jeudy guy. No. It's you. You haven't been challenging. And imagine getting coached by Nick Saban, then going through the carousel of coaches here and losing. Yeah. Derek Wolf stopped me on the drive one time because I said, I think Jerry Judy's going to check out if he's not like heavily involved as the number one backside X. And Derek said, no, he won't. He was checked out because he was losing. He wants to be coached. He wants to be challenged. And your note about Sean Payton coaching him up details, that's something Jeudy could rise to the occasion.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You're talking about how he was pushed by Nick Saban. The other thing also, losing affects everybody in different ways. I don't think Jerry Jeudy had ever experienced losing in his football life until he got to Denver. And there are some players that can handle it, and there are some players that struggle with it. I think Jeudy clearly struggled with that. And then you have the drops, that Chargers game late in the 2020 season. I feel like there are a lot of fans watching this and listening to this who haven't been able to get past that game because you still hear, oh, he drops a lot of passes. Well, no, he actually doesn't. He's improved his drop rate. But between that Chargers game and that key drop against Tennessee in his first game back in 2020, there were some first impression things that have been hard for people to shake, but that's not who Jerry Jeudy is right now. That being said, there's another level he can get to. But at least when we're talking about doing so, we're talking about coming off of a 6-game stretch at the end of the season that was terrific. That, he's playing that backside X position, and we really saw what he could be. Like it was there. He had the 3 touchdowns against Kansas City, big games without the touchdowns throughout that stretch. That's the guy the Broncos drafted. And so I think between Sean Payton's own scouting of Jerry Jeudy back in 2020 and then watching the tape from last year, he sees a guy who has all the tools to be a legit wide receiver one. This may be the best thing that ever happened to Jerry Jeudy, but he's got to respond to being pushed. That's the thing. I mean, this coaching staff won't always pat you on the back. They're going to sometimes kick you in the butt, and we'll see how he handles it. So far, I think the indications are positive based on what we've witnessed in practice.
Yeah, so far they've been quite positive, and I believe Sean Payton, again, not revealing what we've seen. I hate we have to say that, but just to be clear, I believe Sean Payton is setting him up to do what he does best. As we get a special guest on
Ruby's in the house today.
Ruby's in the house. What's
Ruby's
up, Ruby?
In the house.
Ruby Soho or just Ruby?
Just Ruby. Just Ruby. And Charlotte's in the house too.
Hey, Charlotte.
Yeah.
There you go.
Says hey. Yeah.
We got all
there we go.
Maybe Charlotte can play wide receiver, right?
Broncos can you play wide receiver for the Broncos? She says no.
Okay, that's fine. It's all good. It's all good.
Well, she's a dancer. I think she'd be more of a running back, and you'd try to actually get a little bit of the dancing out of her and get her moving in a straight line, but she's got the footwork.
Yeah, got the fleet of feet. You got to have that. Just be a little more north and south. But if we look at Jerry Jeudy competing against Courtland Sutton, Tim Patrick, what's interesting, Mace, is I think Sean Payton's going to set Jeudy up to do what he does best and keep him away from what he doesn't do well. And to me, that makes him a primary target. Different from Patrick and Sutton, who are more of the big bodies, Marcus Colston, Michael Thomas types. I think Jerry Jeudy could be quite special with Sean Payton.
I think he could as well, but it's interesting you mentioned the Michael Thomas, Marcus Colston type of players. We know that Courtland Sutton specifically has talked about watching that Michael Thomas film. The thing is, there's really only room for one of those types of players at a time, right?
Yep.
And that's where the question comes into you mentioning, is Courtland Sutton even on this team when the regular season begins? Because in terms of constructing that room, there may be room for only one of Sutton and Patrick, not both. And Timmy Pat's still just coming off the ACL, probably doesn't have the same value on the market as Courtland Sutton, a healthy Courtland Sutton would. So as you watch preseason, as you watch those games, take note of how they're using those receivers, because it's possible if you see a lot of Courtland Sutton and he's making plays, could be a little bit of a showcase there. And I think he may not be the only receiver who the Broncos try to showcase this summer.
Yeah, they're showcasing him for a potential trade or just to entice other teams out there, because not many teams have the wide receiver core that the Broncos have. And the other receiver you might be talking about is KJ Hamler.
Yes.
We've gone 10 minutes on this show. I brought up Marvin Mims Jr., the rookie, but we haven't talked about Hamler yet. And Hamler could be one of those guys. And I wish we lived in a world where KJ would have never been hurt. Because you see what Jahan Dotson is doing with the Commanders, and 7 touchdowns last year in 12 games. Like that could have been KJ, because Dotson learned from KJ.
Right. It's just KJ hasn't been healthy. It's the old cliche, best ability is availability. It's never been something that KJ has had in his benefit. And now, again, talking about the construction of the wide receiver room and certain types at each spot, and having to make sure that the back end has some special teamers, you drafted Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is going to be on this team. Frankly, I think the only thing that really could push KJ Hamler onto the Broncos 53 for the regular season is sadly an injury or injuries elsewhere. And then you end up having him back. Just right now, the way that room is structured, I don't think there's room for both Mims and Hamler if they're both healthy. And so then you're trying to, at that point, then you're like, okay, what can we get for KJ Hamler? Because if you like where Marvin Mims is going, then you're gonna want to play that out. And he's in the first year of his contract. KJ Hamler is in the fourth year of his contract. Although that being said, when we talk about injuries and availability, remember Marvin Mims not out there toward the end of OTAs, dealing with an injury. Both him and Drew Sanders were over on the side field. So, and I know this, they want to get a good look at Marvin Mims. Mike Westhoff told me toward the end of minicamp that one guy that he really wants to see and get a read on as they get into training camp that he hasn't yet been able to get a read on is Marvin Mims, which kind of tells you that's what they want to do at punt returner. We'll get into that couple of position previews down the line here. Right. But I think that also tells you that, okay, if they want to see what Marvin Mims has as a returner, there may not even be room for KJ Hamler in that role either.
Right. There may not be room for the guy that I can't talk about because I broke everyone's spirit last year. I'm sorry. But Montreal Washington, like, I know we'll talk more about him on the special teams episode in a couple episodes, but like, we're talking wide receivers. He is a receiver. They tried it last year and it didn't work. I don't know how he makes the team on his receiving ability.
I don't either. Again, you just kind of start going through the depth chart, and can he be a gunner? I don't see that. I see that more as Marquez Callaway.
Yes.
So that there's one spot gone. Jalen Virgil, who, he had that long touchdown against Tennessee, was still kind of learning the branches of the route tree, so to speak, as the season went on. I mean, he's got that speed, but is there room for him in there? I don't know. I mean, I would say this. You got Jalen Virgil, Brandon Johnson, and Montreal Washington that were rookies last year, and they're back. The one who's probably in the best position right now, as we're sitting here counting down to camp, is Brandon Johnson.
Yes, 100%. And I would say with Jalen Virgil, I've been disappointed by him this offseason, Mace, but I don't know if that's necessarily him. I don't think it is. I just think that this Brandon Johnson has looked so damn good.
Yeah.
And it's like, I love Jalen Virgil. I appreciate his game as a returner and as a receiver, but he hasn't popped like Brandon Johnson has popped.
Well, and I would say he hasn't even popped like Taylor Grimes has popped.
Oh, boy.
And there's another dude.
Everyone's got
like Brandon Johnson.
Name. Number 13 on the field, number 1 in your hearts.
Yep, from Incarnate Word. out of Texas. Yeah, there's a guy to keep your eye on right there, because as with Brandon Johnson, this dude just catches everything. And he is already looking to be an exceptional route runner. And when you start seeing this, that's why we talk about maybe a crunch to the top of the depth chart, because I don't know if this team keeps 7 wide receivers. I think it probably ends up being 5 or 6. And then you're going to want to make the practice squad work right. But if you've got these young kids that are showing a lot of potential, and you have a new coach that isn't wedded to anything, and that's a thing. Sean Payton isn't married to what was around here. And all the evidence that you needed came when he turned a relatively stable position, kicker, into a position that has a lot of question marks. Just because he wanted to go in a different direction, you're going to probably get younger there. You might be getting younger at wide receiver. So if he sees these guys developing, remember, he kept Marcus Colson, 7th round pick out of Hofstra, was a surprise to make that first Saints team that he had back in 2006. And Colston spent a decade proving Sean Payton right. If he believes in one of these guys at the back end that's shooting up the depth chart, that's just going out there making plays, he will not be afraid to keep that player ahead of somebody who's proven. And that's why I do think as we get into the summer and get close to the deadline, it may not be just receiver, but I think there's going to be some shocking moves made by this team.
Yes, Sean Payton will shake some things up. I mean, even little Jordan Humphrey, right?
Yes.
Little Jordan Humphrey, who's not little, by the way, because I saw him, I was like 17. I'm like, little Jordan Humphrey is not little.
He's big.
He's a big Jordan.
He's big body, not a fast
Callaway
guy.
Can make plays, not fast guy, but Callaway can make plays. So it's like, my God, I don't even know how they keep guys on the practice squad, because they're so packed at this position.
Yeah, I mean, we barely touched on Kendall Hinton, who's played quite a bit over
Don't
the
you
last
just want to keep him around? Like Kendall Hinton, to me, just what he did for this team, as long as he wants to play football, I want Kendall Hinton around.
I do as well. And I think with him, when we talk about little Jordan Humphrey, Marquez Callaway, because that's the special teams jack of all trades role, I think those 3 are probably fighting for one spot. And we'll see how Hinton progresses when he gets out there. But those back end receiver spots, Mike Westhoff and Ben Kotwika are going to have as much to say about it as Kerry Colbert, Joe Lombardi, the receivers coach, and the offensive coordinator, respectively.
Right.
So that's another thing to keep your eye on in terms of what, because you may look at this if the Broncos keep 6 receivers, you may end up looking at those 6 receivers and saying, well, they weren't the best wide receivers, but it ain't just about that. It's about what you can do on teams. And we know that's going to be more important around here than it's been in quite some time.
Yeah, teams is going to be good or guys are going to be gone. That's the way it's going with Sean Payton. Now, I don't, in these training camp previews, Mace, I don't do this on purpose, but it seems like when we do one, I'm always like, what about the other position? Because it ties in. And I think tight end ties into the wide receivers. Yeah. We're not going to preview them, but you mentioned 5 or 6 receivers being kept. To me, it's the crunch at tight end that's going to lead to the shrinking of how many wide receivers you're able to keep on the 53-man roster.
And the other thing is what kind of dynamic pass catchers you have at the tight end position as well, because if both Albert Okwuegbunam and Greg Dulcich show that they can be in that joker type of role that Sean Payton talks about, it may be that they're taking the spot of one of the receivers out there. Now, again, special teams is going to affect the back end of that as well, and it's the one thing that Alberto and Greg Dulcich really don't do is play on teams. So you're going to have some roster massaging there. But yeah, if you can get dynamic pass catching production from a tight end or 2, then who knows? I mean, then you're going extra as Cooper makes an appearance now. Hi,
there's Cooper. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Coop.
Cooper's camera shy, I think.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Yeah. Yeah. What a sweetheart. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
we got 2 dogs and Charlotte making their appearances today. But hey, it shows everyone's interested in wide receivers, right? There you go. It's probably going to be the most ferocious competition that we see on the Broncos during training camp. So, and it's the one that everyone's going to want to have their eyes on. And let's face it, if you're going out to camp and watching practice, watching the receivers is fun. It always is.
Yes.
And there's always somebody that surprises you, and that's why we're telling you keep your eye on Taylor Grimes. We're just giving you a little advance notice, so when you go out there for practicing, you see number 13 out there making plays. First of all, that's Taylor Grimes. That's not Caden Davis. Caden Davis is in the USFL this season.
Right.
But don't be surprised when you see a number 13 out there just grabbing everything, and you're like, "Who is this guy?" It's Taylor Grimes from Incarnate Word, baby.
Go ahead and pre-draft that tweet. Like, day 1 impressions. I love Taylor Grimes.
I might
Make it
well.
happen. It's gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
Catches everything. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy. It's a crazy position on a run-heavy team. So, like, if this was the greatest show on turf, I'd be like, oh my God. But these guys, it's such a competition. So we are fixing to find out as training camp previews continue. It is Orange and Blue today. We are presented by Sean Payton. He's Andrew Mason. I'm Cecil Lammey. Stay frosty out there, everybody.